What's up everyone, I'm Joe, and today I'm going to be telling you why I think the Boston butt is the best piece of meat to start with for a beginner. I'm also going to be walking you step by step through this entire process so that you have the confidence and knowledge to smoke your own Boston butt, even if it's your first time. This is going to be a complete guide and a foundation for what you can build your Boston butt recipe off of. So let's get started. Despite the name, the Boston butt actually comes from the pig's upper shoulder. It's super marbled and has a lot of connective tissue. And you might be wondering, why is it a Boston butt if it's from the shoulder? Well, it became associated with Boston in the pre-revolutionary American era. In New England, cuts of pork were actually packed into barrels called butts. These were used for storage and shipping. The next time someone asks you, why is it called a Boston butt? You can tell them. So some characteristics about the Boston butt is it usually weighs between 5 and 8 pounds. There are some big ones out there, but I recommend if you're a beginner, sticking with 5 to 8 pounds. Now the Boston butt has a lot of intramuscular fat, which contributes to it being such a great meat for a beginner to smoke. And there's a few reasons that I recommend it as the first meat you should smoke. The first reason is that it's almost impossible to mess up. You can smoke this thing low and slow, and it's gonna come out great. You can smoke it fast and hot, and it's still gonna come out great. All of the marbling that's in this piece of meat really makes it forgiving because you can overcook it and it's still gonna shred and make some great meals. You can undercook it and it's gonna slice and still be amazing. So it really is foolproof. And secondly, if you do manage to mess this thing up, it's a cheap piece of meat. I paid $10 for this 5 to 6 pound pork butt. So if you do mess it up, you're not out very much money. And lastly, I recommend it for a beginner because it is perfect for introducing them the concepts that you're gonna need when you're smoking. That's gonna be basting, spritzing, handling the stall, wrapping, and most importantly, introducing you to long cooks, because a longer cook is very different than something that only takes you a couple hours. And those concepts are gonna be applied to every piece of meat you smoke. When do I start this thing so that it'll be done on time? Well, the answer is not as straightforward as you would like, because this thing can literally take from 1 hour to 2 hours per pound. So that means if you have a 5 pound Boston butt, it could take 5 hours to 10 hours. Every piece of meat is different. And the thing that's gonna dictate it the most is gonna be the temperature that you keep your smoker at. If you smoke at 225, you're gonna be a lot closer to the 10-hour range for a 5 pound pork butt. If you're smoking at 275 to 300, you're gonna be a lot closer to that 5-hour range. If this is your first Boston butt and you're smoking it for a function, I would go with the higher end just so you can wrap it and keep it at temp. It's a lot easier to hold the temperature than it is to make it cook faster. You don't want to be sitting there with an hour to the function and this thing is still on the smoker. Now the second part of the prep is going to be trimming. And this, to be honest, is completely optional. If this is your first Boston butt, I probably wouldn't even worry about trimming it. And when you go to shred it, you just want to make sure that you maybe pull those bigger pieces of fat out that people aren't going to want to bite into. For the sake of the video, I'm going to trim it and I'll show you how to do that.
Let's begin our trimming exercise by positioning your Boston butt with the fat cap facing upwards, as this area requires the most attention. As we've previously discussed, you can either leave the fat cap intact or decorate it with a crosshatch pattern. However, today, we're focusing on carefully reducing the fat cap. For this task, a razor-sharp knife is essential for making precise cuts. Trim with the finesse of a gardener tending to an overgrown bush. Pinch and lift small sections of fat for trimming. This technique ensures control and precision. Take your time, removing the fat bit by bit. Keep in mind that moderation is key. While you can always trim more, you can't replace what has already been removed. The goal is to eliminate any fat that likely won't render well during cooking. In the art of trimming, as in many culinary endeavors, the less is more approach often works best. When you're satisfied with the amount of fat removed, stop. You've successfully trimmed your Boston butt. Let's now focus on the art of seasoning your Boston butt. Whether or not to use a binder is up to you. The purpose of creating a binder is to help the spices adhere to the meat, creating a superior bark during cooking. For today's lesson, we'll be using mustard as our binder of choice. Rest assured, the mustard's flavor will vanish during smoking, leaving no trace in the final dish. Remember, moderation is key. A small amount is all you need. Proceed to evenly spread the mustard over the surface of the Boston butt, ensuring a uniform layer that will act as the base of our seasonings. Now, let's move on to the actual seasoning. While the choice of spice is a matter of personal preference, we'll use a convenient pre-made blend today. Sprinkle the seasoning from about 18 inches above the meat to ensure even coverage. Once fully seasoned, your Boston butt is ready for the smoker. Get ready for a delightful transformation as the heat and smoke work their magic, turning our seasoned meat into a delicious feast.
All right, so I'm not going to be diving too much into this particular smoker, although if you're using a Weber Smoky Mountain, I have a video that you can watch. Click up here at the top right, and it's going to give you a complete guide and walkthrough of how to use the Weber Smoky Mountain. If you're using a different type of smoker, the process is going to be pretty much similar. It really comes down to temperature, and you're going to read a lot of things about what temperature to smoke at, 225, 275, 300. Don't stress about it so much. Go between 225 and 300, and then keep that temperature consistent, and your meat's going to come out great. And honestly, even if you were to jump from 225 to 275 and you have flare-ups, which you're probably going to because you're new, the meat's still going to be fine. It has a lot of fat and it's very forgiving. I'd maybe start experimenting with maybe 225, 250, 275 on different cooks. See what you like and what works best for you as far as the time goes. Temperatures like 250 to 275 is going to help you push through the stall, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. I'm hoping I don't hit that with this because I'm smoking around 275. So once you get the smoke rolling and the temperature is stabilized, we can go ahead and throw the Boston butt on the smoke. Now, as far as the wood goes, use what you have available. Any good hardwood is going to work. So I'm using cherry here, but if you're in Texas, you probably got post oak. Here in Kentucky, we got hickory and cherry, and that's what I'm going to use. The type of wood matters way less than you might think. You need to keep that temperature stable, and your food's going to turn out great. So let's get this thing on here, and we'll go inside and we'll talk about a couple other things. Now let's talk about the fat cap and whether you need to smoke it with fat cap up or fat cap down, or does it matter? First thing that I'll tell you is don't worry about it so much. At the end of the day, we're not smoking competition barbecue. So the common belief supporting fat cap up is that as the meat cooks, the fat will render and the juices will baste the meat. And fat side down supporters will actually believe that you get a better smoke flavor with the fat cap down because the meat side is exposed to more smoke. Just throw the damn thing on the smoker, get some smokes in you, and you're gonna learn what works for you. In my opinion, the smoker you have is going to dictate whether you do fat side up or down. Let me know in the comments what you prefer to do, fat side up or fat side down. So what I like to do is I like to put the fat cap towards the heat so that I'm protecting the meat from the fire. This is going to be different on every smoker. So from here, we can actually just let that Boston butt set on that smoker until it reaches an internal temperature of 203. Now that's just a guideline. Every piece of meat's a little different, but as a beginner, that'll be a perfect place for you to start. But we're going to actually be throwing in a couple optional steps to kind of help level it up a little bit. But this is going to be a good foundation for you to start with so that you can kind of make it your own. Now what we're going to do in a couple hours is once that bark has set on that Boston butt, we're going to start spritzing it. At this point, it has been about 3 hours. This thing's been smoking at about 275 exactly for the past 3 hours. And at this point, we can spritz it with just water. You cannot spritz it at all, like I've said. Now we're gonna be using a mixture of water and vinegar, about a 3-to-1 ratio. I like to use something acidic so that it cuts through that fat flavor. And we'll do this about every hour. You'll know it's ready to spritz when you can take your finger and you can't rub that rub off. So we'll put this thing back on there. We don't want the lid off too long. So at this point, we're probably looking at about roughly 4 or 5 hours in. We're gonna go ahead and spritz it again. That bark's looking really good. I'm happy with it. So at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and throw in a thermometer. And I'll see you in a couple more hours. We've been spritzing for about every hour. So as long as you do that, up until we need to wrap, you're good to go. So before we wrap the Boston butt, I want to talk a little bit about what the stall is, why it's happening, and some ways that you can get around it. So the stall may or may not happen, and the stall can confuse and worry inexperienced smokers, causing them to do some crazy things, like jacking their temperature up too high, taking the meat off the smoker, adding more wood, and all kinds of other random things because they don't really understand or even maybe have even heard of what the stall is. Worry not, because the stall is a very important part of the process, and you're probably going to see it happen around 150 to 170 degrees internal. And what you'll notice is that the temperature actually stabilizes completely and doesn't want to budge, and sometimes it might even decline. So what's happening is moisture is being pulled to the surface of the meat and it begins to evaporate. And during this process, the moisture actually cools off the meat, similar to how sweat cools off the body. And there's three things you can do that I'll talk about when the stall happens. The first thing you can do is the simplest thing you can do, and that's just be patient, because you're eventually going to push right on through the stall and those temperatures will start climbing again. The second and most famous is called the Texas crutch. And that's when you're wrapping in aluminum foil. This significantly decreases the amount of time that you spend in the stall. And sometimes if you wrap in time, you won't even see the stall happen. And lastly, you can gradually increase the temperature. So if you're smoking at 225, slowly increase that temperature in anticipation of the stall. I don't normally do this. I'll usually just wrap or push right on through the stall. But for the demonstration of this video, because it is the most popular method, we're gonna use the Texas crutch. And our Boston butt's at about 165 internal temperature. I'm not seeing much of a stall, but we're gonna go ahead and wrap anyways, because I have the bark that I want and it's starting to look really good. So I'm gonna go get the Boston butt and we'll talk about wrapping.
Let's turn our attention to a critical step in the art of barbecue, wrapping the Boston butt to combat the stall. This process, reminiscent of a science experiment, can involve adding liquids such as apple or orange juice, or even sweeteners like honey or brown sugar. However, in our demonstration today, we'll let nature take its course. As the Boston butt cooks, it will generate its own moisture, aiding in the cooking process. Now, you'll want to use 2 sheets of foil, wrapping tightly to ensure no leaks. Precision is key, so be thorough in sealing your masterpiece. Once wrapped securely, it's time to return the Boston butt to the smoker. You'll want to continue smoking until the internal temperature reaches a comfortable 203 degrees. This ensures a juicy, tender result. By following these steps, you'll be well on your way to achieving barbecue perfection.
Okay, so we just hit 203. What we're gonna do now is drain the liquid out of the foil into this bowl. You can retain some of it if you wanna mix it up in it later. So now that we've got it drained off here, what we'll do is take a glaze. This is completely optional. What I've done here is I've mixed store-bought barbecue with some brown sugar and with some honey, just to keep it simple. You can do a lot of different things with glaze. We could have just left this wrap and took it off and let it rest, and it would have been perfectly fine. I'm gonna throw a glaze on there just because I like for it to get a little sticky. So now that we got it glazed, what we're gonna do is we're gonna crank that temperature up to about 300, and we're gonna give it about 30 minutes for this thing to tack up really nicely. It's gonna have a nice sticky glaze to it, and that's what we're looking for. Okay, so I glazed this thing about 30 minutes ago, so we're gonna go ahead and take it inside and let it rest. Okay, so we've let this thing rest for about an hour. I'd say an hour is about a minimum of what you want to let it rest. And I'm excited about pulling this thing apart.
Now that your Boston butt has adequately rested, it's time to begin the delightful task of shredding the meat. A word of caution: don gloves, as the meat may still be quite hot. A hallmark of a properly smoked Boston butt is that the bone should come out easily and cleanly, free of any meat. As you shred the meat, be vigilant in removing any unrendered fat to ensure that your guests enjoy only the finest bites. The meat should fall apart effortlessly by hand. You can shred it as finely as you prefer, according to your taste. Once the meat is shredded to your liking, place it on a platter. For an added touch of flavor, you may choose to sprinkle more seasoning over the meat and mix it well. With this final step, your Boston butt is ready to serve. Congratulations on a job well done.
And there you have it. With this video, you should be able to smoke your first Boston butt from start to finish. The Boston butt can be as simple or complicated as you make it. If you want to take it out of the package and season it and throw it on the smoker and smoke it until it's 203 internal, let it rest, you're gonna have a great piece of meat. Or you can throw all of those optional steps in that we looked at today. But the most important thing is just getting started, because it's actually very, very, very simple. So if you like this video, go ahead and like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell, because I got so many more videos coming your way. And if you're currently kicked back with a beer and smoking your first Boston butt while you watch this video, then good luck and smoke on. Until next time.